Okay. Well, a very hearty welcome to all of you tonight to this, the first of a wonderful new series of 4 that the Pass It On Network has the privilege to provide through some very remarkable people who are going to be speaking. The whole series is called Reweaving the Web of Life, to which we all belong. And this first session goes under the title of Feeling Entangled Roots. I'm just going to say a few of the housekeeping rules. The first is that, as always with a Zoom, if you could just please keep yourself muted if you're not going to be speaking. And just say a few words about why we call this series the 50-50 series. What we try to do with this series is to provide very remarkable speakers and then to cut them right back and say you can only speak for 50% of the time, because we want other people to have a chance to interact with you and to share their insights and to ask their questions. So that's where the 50-50 comes from. That is our structure. So tonight we're going to have 2 speakers. We're going to have Jan, who's going to introduce them to you, and then the 2 speakers are going to engage in a very interesting dialogue. There will be a question and insight section afterwards. We invite you, please, to type your questions into the chat box. Just put a Q in front of it if it's a question, or an I in front of it if it is an insight. We will share the link to the chat box because we've found through the past that there's always very interesting information, people wanting to share resources and other information, and so we share that afterwards, and there will be a follow-up. And I think from me then, that is all, and I'm going to hand over to Jan, who's going to introduce our speakers for tonight. Jan,
Great.
Over to you.
Thank you so much. 10 years ago, Moira and I were inspired by the words of a Hopi tribal elder, Chief Dan Ebahema, to create the global Pass It On network of elder advocates. His words, which were transcribed from his ancestors, frame this 4-part series of conversations about our society's daunting task to reweave the web of life. As the chief said, "You have been telling the people that this is the 11th hour. Now you must go back and tell the people that this is the hour. And there are things to be considered. Where are you living? What are you doing? What are your relationships? Are you in right relation? Where is your water? Know your garden. It is time to speak your truth, to create your community, to be good to each other, because we are the ones who we've been waiting for." And our presenters, Peter Whitehouse from the USA and Ethan Bonerath from Canada, are both leaders who are passionate about learning that connects all living beings across generations, across species, and around our planet, Mother Earth. I'm going to pass over to Peter, who will initiate the dialogue, the conversation with Ethan, to describe the work that both of them are doing, I hope. Thank you so much, Peter and Ethan.
Well, thank you, Jan, Moira, and the whole team for allowing us to construct not only this program today with my new friend Ethan, but a series of 4 programs. And I'm speaking to you, as you noticed, I changed my name as Sylvanus, a transdisciplinary tree doctor who asks a general question of the human race in a kind of metaphorical way. What is it that we can learn about health from trees and forests? And this series will continue in the tradition of being inspired by indigenous peoples. Today, we'll be talking to you from the USA and Canada. In June, we'll be talking to you from Brazil and the Marta rainforest on the Atlantic coast of Brazil. And then we'll go to New England. And in New England, we'll trace roots into Scotland with Kathy Bailey and her daughter. So this is a series of 4 conversations that are intergenerational. And we hope you will be inspired to have these conversations yourselves. And it is my great privilege to be getting to know Ethan Bonerath and his family. And Ethan is a young student who will now tell his story about his global leadership project and how you all can help him and us in that project of global leadership. Ethan, please tell us about yourself.
So hi, for those that don't know me, I'm Ethan, a 16-year-old high school student. I'm currently in the studio of Chop FM here at Pickering College, my high school in Newmarket, Ontario. To start, I'd like to thank and acknowledge this as a secret meeting place for the many Indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, particularly the Chippewa and Mississauga First Peoples. I would also like to acknowledge the Chippewa of Georgina Island as the closest Indigenous community to Pickering College, and recognize the ancient and enduring legacy of First Nations and Métis people in Ontario as stewards of the land. I would also like to thank the station manager, Gareth Stewart, for facilitating my use of the radio equipment for today. I grew up in an intergenerational home throughout my life, first with my great-grandmother and later my grandparents. Living in a multi-generational home taught me compassion and to take care of those around me. When I was 12, I began volunteering in a long-term care facility near my home. I loved seeing the joy on residents' faces whenever I volunteered and talked to them. I'm now a high school student here at Pickering College. Pickering College's mission is to instill in every student the ability and responsibility to make the world greater, better, and more beautiful than they discovered it. We have a global leadership project, which includes a 2-year capstone program in which they guide students to take real action on a social issue. My GLP program, which I would like you guys to help me with, is to foster and inspire intergenerational dialogue and connections to address the world's wicked, complex, multi-layered challenges. In the past year, I've had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Peter and working with the Legacy Project. They are now helping and guiding me to develop my GLP and create a meaningful action. A goal for my GLP is for generations to really talk about the things that they don't normally talk about, to go deeper. We don't have a lot of opportunities for deep discussion with people of differing ages. So the question we'd like to ask you today is, if you were talking to someone older or younger than you about the big stuff like climate change, life, and the world, what might you ask them that you'd be normally hesitant to?
Thanks, Ethan. So I've become Dr. Peter, the name that Ethan and I agreed he would call me. And I'm a geriatric neurologist and a cognitive scientist and environmental ethicist for this part of the conversation. Ethan, I actually first met you, I think, when I saw a video of you that you made talking about real conversations with your father, Ruben, who's with us, and your grandfather. And by the way, I should say that several of Ruben's classmates who are also doing global leadership projects are also with us today. So welcome to those of you from Pickering School. And let me also thank Susan and Brian from the Legacy Project, because they did introduce us, and you'll be hearing from them later on, just talking a little bit about their incredible work in Canada, bringing the 7 generations thinking to these issues. So Ethan, we've set ourselves up, haven't we? We're supposed to model these deeper conversations. So let's start with that video or your home. You said you learned compassion. What is it about the intergenerational nature of our family life that you think is important that perhaps we can bring forth? Can you just elaborate a little bit on that a bit more?
Yeah, for me, home is a place to be connected in relationships, to be comfortable, to be vulnerable. I find when I'm at home, I'm able to talk deeply with those around me. And I find as a person grows older, their relationships kind of expand and their community expands. So whether it be a club or here at Pion, I'm growing my community, for example, at Pickering College. So I feel intergenerational dialogue and connection is very important overall. From there, I kind of want to move on to a little bit, because your shirt today is Yin and Yang, right? So
Great. That's my tree doctor shirt. Yin and Yang and the oak tree.
Yep. I kind of want to talk a little bit about Yin and Yang perspectives. So opposite perspectives kind of working together. So the pando in Utah is a organism that can either be seen as the single largest organism or as a grouping of individual quaking aspens. This idea of kind of individualism and the individual trees versus community and society. So they each are interconnected and root signal and share things, and they all have entangled roots like today's discussion. And I feel this is similar to when we have multi-generational and intergenerational dialogue, how two people will talk together and nurture each other's lives and create community and society and be more than just this sum of their parts. So I was wondering, how do you think we can balance these opposite views or these yin and yang kind of views?
Thanks for a hard question. And the world is full of differences. I mean, trees celebrate diversity. They interact with so many different, and we need to look for those interconnections that bring us together. But I think you're right. In these intergenerational conversations we're trying to foster, Ethan, we need to find out where there may be differences of perspective that can really enrich the conversation and not just kind of, as you said, be superficial, but have a real conversation. What about, so I think one of the things that the intergenerational brings for me is a sense of time, a sense of thinking of time differently, because I have been alive 73 years, and you 16, I think you said. So what do you think these different perspectives on time contribute to our sense of what brings us together and where we can learn from the differences?
Mm-hmm. As you said, I'm 16, so I'm earlier on in my life journey. And I feel in the world, we tend to oversimplify time and kind of life journeys. They're very complex. We often make stereotypes and judgments about people that are younger or people that are a bit older. And so I feel society needs to allow for more complexity and allow for people to be who they are rather than what people may associate with them. And I feel deeper conversations between youth and every other generation or just generations together is very vital for that. How do you think we could have deeper conversations that allow for more meaning and purpose to come out from them?
So Ethan and I have been getting to know each other, and we're going back and forth with questions here. Let's pick on a topic that I think is really hard for a lot of human beings to talk about. And trees, by the way, teach us lessons about this. And I know that you had a death in your family recently, one of your grandmothers. So I do think that part of feeling the vibrancy of life is actually having the honesty to talk about our different views about dying and death. What do you think? I mean, is that a way to take a conversation deeper?
Sure, absolutely.
I mean, we're talking about a time when our whole species is threatened with extinction. So this is like our own mortality in the context of potentially our whole species being going extinct. That is profound.
Mm-hmm. Linking from that, going back to the pando, which we were talking about earlier, it has seen its entire life of growth, of development. And up until recently, now that there's changes to the ecosystem from human interactions with the world, it has seen a decline. And I feel that is a clear indication of the hurt and the climate change that we are creating. Another thing from this aspect of death that you were talking about, yesterday was my grandmother's memorial. And when I was there, I was thinking about legacy. And I realized that legacy is more of something from the soul, the meaning, rather than just a name on a gravestone. People like Napoleon, their names might be memorialized, but I feel meaning is what's really in legacy. What I want to pass on is nurturing the web of life. And I feel the legacy someone passes on is more about what they impact and how they impact other people in the world. So my grandmother impacted me in a certain way that I'm going to impact others. And that is trying to be a good ancestor and impacting the future generations to leave a legacy to improve the lives of others.
Right. What a great 7 generations perspective. And I think one of the differences between younger people and older people, I realized I was older when I was closer to the end of my life than the beginning of my life. Now, none of us know when we're going to die, and so young people obviously leave the earth what we would consider prematurely. But this idea of thinking about legacy, it seems to me essential. And the sooner you start getting older and thinking about legacy, maybe the better. One of the things that your project, and coming back to the question you've asked the whole group, is how do you take these deeper conversations into action? So what are your thoughts about, and you can throw this out to the group for later conversation, we can have these conversations in this space, but what do you think the key features are about bringing it out into the real world and doing things that make a difference for other people and for nature?
I feel like really talking and that intergenerational dialogue is really what we need to kind of work towards those big problems, and such as climate change, and kind of youth and older and people who are a bit older have different views. And I feel that comes down to life experience. Each person has their own individual life experience, their different knowledge, where they grew up, and that each makes who we are. And I feel by sharing those experiences from generation to generation and person to person allows for growth and development, and for people to develop, to nurture the world more greatly. How do you see the future? I know for a lot of my generation, it's a scary idea of the future. How do you see the future?
It's an interesting question. I know you're interested in cognitive science, and when you ask me how I see the future, I'm thinking the power of human imagination. I mean, we tend to think about our memories and how as we get older, we can't remember things the way we used to, but I think that's exactly the right question to ask. How do we, not only individually, but collectively, imagine the future, a future that's a bit more hopeful? And of course, I look at you, Ethan, and I say, well, and this is true for me. This is why I do the work in intergenerational, that you're the hope for the future, because you are the future. You are the future ancestors. And then they're your children. We could talk about that, Ethan. That's a deep subject, but your children are the unborn that you will increasingly be thinking about, you and other people's children. So I think you're right, Ethan. The future doesn't look so great if you look at all the numbers, if you look at what's happening to our physical world. But I think we have to look at the cultural world, our stories. We have to create, as Thomas Berry said, new stories. And that's what you and I are trying to do, I think. And that's what these conversations should do. What's a new story that, even though we're facing decline of our environment, that can change the behavior of human beings towards Mother Earth? What can and it's also how you frame questions that are so important. So it's always worthwhile time thinking, in my opinion, about what the question is. But have you had some experiences that make you feel like those are the kinds of experiences that you want to have more of, that would create a future where those experiences would be available to more people? I mean, what are those kind of positive experiences today that you'd like to take into the future?
Yeah. Well, I remember meeting you and doing the Legacy Project initiatives. I found those very refreshing, and I really enjoyed talking with you, especially today and our other meetings. And it's interesting to talk on a deeper level to people, and I feel that vulnerability is very important. See, I see my future, and there's many things I'm unsure about. So talking with someone who has more life experience than me, it's nice to understand and see that we're all human and be able to just talk to anyone.
Well, I thank you for that. It has been funny, in a strange way, to get to know you just by Zoom. As you know, I'll be in Canada a couple of times in the summer, and I'm hoping to go canoeing, or I'm not going to play hockey with you, but whatever you Canadians like to do, I'll be happy to join in your life a little bit. For me, the hope is that we still can regain our connections to nature. And so the hat of the tree doctor says, it's a quote from John Muir, the clearest way to see the universe is through a forest wilderness. So I think when we go into nature, go into forests and open ourselves, we create the possibilities for learning more deeply. I think it's all about deep learning. And I celebrate your school and its work, but many places that we're not educating children in ways that allow them to become new people. We're just trying to model them after the way we behave. And there is a part of me that feels quite badly for what my generation, particularly of white men, have done to the environment and the attitudes we've had not only about indigenous peoples, but also about the planet in general, kind of using it just for our short-term advantage. So for me, it's intergenerational walks in nature. So that's what I want to do with you. And if it's in a canoe, that's fine. But let me ask you the same question, because what do you see in the future that, and by the way, I will say that Rob DeLate next month in June wants to ask that question. If you imagine yourself in 2040, and we have done the kinds of things that we want to make it a more equitable, nature-friendly society, what are the things, Ethan, that you and I should do together today that give us the sense that we're creating that future?
I feel that really like you were saying earlier, it's good to take some time to think. I feel like bringing intergenerational dialogue to youth, especially in schools like you're doing in Cleveland, I feel that's a really good way of kind of improving life and improving the way we do things. For me, when I was younger, I thought I wanted to become a doctor or a psychiatrist, and now I'm not quite sure. It's very blurry. I want to get into something with cognitive science or something along those terms. And I know you do similar fields and you're interested in similar things. And so a question for you I would have that links back to my question for everyone else of something that you would be worried to ask someone is, what kind of areas in your profession or your life would you go back to and revisit to possibly change something for the better? Or where's an area that you think went well, or any advice you could give me?
Wow. Well, you hit a nerve, and I'll tell you where the nerve, it's right about here, since I'm a neurologist. When you brought up learning, because to me, Ethan, that's, as I said, and you just said too, I think that's what is special about us human beings. That's to say, we can learn, and that's why we've been successful. And perhaps it's why we're now having trouble with our success. So I sometimes say unlearning things is harder than learning things. But I think to put kids in separate boxes and adults and tell them this is the language that they have, this is the learning that they have to become widgets in an industrial society, it's just awful, because learning is spiritual for me. It's passion. It's the neurons I was pointing to are, deep in the brain, where we connect to our animal heritages, not in the frontal lobes where we think we can always be thinking rationally about things and solve problems. But I think you used a word in your paper that's really important, this idea of solution spaces, because I worry sometimes we think all we have to do is to find this problem, and this problem, and solve them one at a time. And you said so wisely, these problems are all interconnected. They are beyond our abilities to solve them individually if we just use our rational brains. We have to use our emotional connectivity as well as our rational brains together. So that's why in our schools we focus on collective wisdom. And I think, Ethan, you're wising up in an amazing way. You're learning the complexities of life at a very early age. That gives me hope.
I know in my essay, which you were just referencing, I talked a lot about deeper conversations and deeper discussions to kind of get at what truly matters. What do you think that word deeper means, or what does it mean to you to go have a deeper conversation with someone?
You used a very important word, Ethan, vulnerability. If I'm not willing to talk about the mistakes I've made, and I didn't answer that question, so I'll give you just a one sentence on that, and learn to think differently. So I was a reductionist, molecular, biological, genetic scientist who had some ideas that we could solve the problem of so-called Alzheimer's disease with a pill. But, as a cognitive scientist and as a public health person, I came to realize that really the approaches to brain aging are much broader than that. Our society has a whole bunch of false hope around technological solutions. Just put enough money into it. Just give a Nobel Prize to somebody, fame and fortune. So I was kind of on a journey towards fame and fortune. And now I'm on a journey of trying to take advantage of being older and having lots of networks. Like I know more people on this call than you do. And that's not a criticism. That's because I've been alive longer. And that's the challenge for me, is to say, how can I be an older person that's accomplished something, some of which I wish I'd spend more time on the environment early on, for example. And I'm going to end with one thing, because it brings us back to your question to the group. I have joined the third act. I am working with the Sunrise Movement. I'm working with Extinction Rebellion. It's time for me to figure out when to get arrested. And I say that because we got to take more action. We got to be more active. We got to get out there with our younger colleagues and do things that wake up people more than we've been able to wake up people by just having conversations. They're really important, but the action has to happen. So maybe you and I are going to go to Ottawa and march around and say, Justin Trudeau, you made a good start with the Indigenous peoples, maybe, but you've got to do more to bring Canada and all the problems they had with the schooling of. See, they use education to try to wipe out Indigenous cultures. We've got to use education to make people appreciate different cultures, in my opinion. Now I feel like I'm on a soapbox. Back to you. And actually, our time is, we've got about 5 minutes before you and I are going to do a great job of passing it to Moira, just the right time. So let's just relax and see what Moira's laughing at that. That's good. Humor is good. Play is good, I think. So what thoughts do you have in the back of your mind that you want to share that you haven't had a chance to share? Or do you want to kind of charge these people with hard work to follow in the next 25 minutes, playfully play with?
One thing I'd like to ask you, going back to that question we're asking everyone about, kind of something you'd be vulnerable to ask another generation. When you were my age or in your 20s, how did people in the world see the ecosystem and the environment? Was it something that was just, you didn't really think that anything was going on, or did you have similar views, or just what was it like?
I think everybody would have a different perspective on that. As an undergraduate, I did take courses in ecology, and at one time thought I would become an ecologist. But then I got enamored the way you did with how people think about nature. I think that's the answer to your question. People think about nature differently than when I was younger. Even if you loved nature, it was still not a part of you in the way that it should have been. It was still something that you took advantage of. So I think that's the hope I have. People like you are starting life thinking about nature differently and thinking of yourself as being part of nature. I was born at the start of the Anthropocene, which will probably be dated about 1948 with nuclear, and with the beginning of the Great Acceleration, where when I was born, there were about 2 to 3 billion people on the planet, and there are now almost 8 billion people. So that's not answering the question personally, but it is saying that my generation and I am positioned to have seen absolutely remarkably destructive changes in the way the number of people on the planet have caused the challenges to your generation and the generations to follow. So I just hope some people wake up faster, and I hope some older people who have awoken will help younger people create learning, be part of learning experiences that allow them to develop this kind of wisdom of the relationship to nature, and to revere those people who have lived on this planet and who are living today, who are protecting nature for us, the indigenous people. And you'll hear next week from Chief Shirley Krenak from Brazil. I don't want to call it Brazil, from that part of that continent that, you know, who lost her rivers. So that's what I think. These are fundamental. That gives me hope that we are actually changing our minds. Yeah, and we'll talk about cognitive science later. How do we change people's minds? How do we create learning environments that really get people to think differently? You know, one of the sensitive points is older people talk a lot, even. And you were wise in our first conversation to tell me to be quiet sometimes. You didn't say it, you were polite. You said, let's have some silence. Okay, so we can have 2 minutes of silence and have all these people thinking about what we've been talking about, or we can let you have the last word here. And ask them a question. Build on your question to the people out there in the real world. What is it you really want to know from these people? Let's assume they're willing to be vulnerable. They're willing to share deeply. Help them, Ethan, do that.
Other than the original question that we have asked the participants, how do you think we can effectively bring together generations and bring together people in the world? I feel oftentimes the world is polarized and we often want to find something to argue with. How, instead of arguing, can we bring people together to understand each other more effectively?
Right, and those are actions, right? How do you create organizations? How do you create so let's go to a very sensitive area for the last minute, because we've talked about learning organizations and places to learn together. How about places where people develop notions of sacred and reverence? Because that's a force in the world that's super powerful and can create a lot of conflict. What would you say to these people about exploring their religious and spiritual beliefs as a way of doing what you said, bringing people together? Can we find a common spiritual belief?
Well, I feel one common spiritual belief is to take care of other people and to nurture the web of life. So I feel if there's one thing that we as a society, as people of the world, can come together and say, is that we want to take care of each other and take care of the planet that we are on.
And you asked about the word depth, and I will mention deep ecology. I absolutely think we need to feel our entangled roots, not just in the part of the planet which is the soil, which we neglect, which really is the part of the trees that where all the action is, but to feel deeply to the core of this whole planet, this whole fragile little ball that's rolling around in space. And to me, that creates all kinds of opportunities for reverence, for feeling that there's a spirit beyond us. So I just want to say that you have the last word, but I think we've taken this conversation places where we didn't know it was going to go, and that's a good thing. So what do you think? And you have the last word, Ethan. You can say, I turn it over to Maura, okay?
Or turn it over to Brian.
Well, we were going to turn it to you, and you were going to turn it to Brian. But anyway, would you like us to turn it over to Brian?
Well, I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say. So I'll turn it over to Moria, who can turn it over to Ryan.
Thank you so much.
We follow instructions. We follow instructions. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Ethan.
Thank you so much, Ethan and Peter. I just feel so excited about this because we're starting to broach a subject that has been tickling my mind ever since I started working with Jan on this question of longevity. And my question is an existential one, and it is, why on earth for the first time ever in the history of mankind, are there so many older people? And I think it would just be so interesting now to hear Brian and his 7 generations, because that will help us to get closer to an answer to that question. Brian, please, will you take over and just tell us more about your organization and lead us further?
Sure. Thank you very much. And I really enjoyed your conversation, Peter and Ethan. Like you said, it went places that were unexpected, which is great. I'm executive director with the Legacy Project, and I'm here with my colleague, Susan Bosak. We're a big picture research, education, and social innovation group near Toronto, Canada. The core of the work is the 7 Generation Initiative. And that's about connecting generations and mutual learning to better their own lives and work together to change the story, #change the story, and navigate the complex, wicked challenges of this moment in human history. And Ethan's project is part of the 7 Generation work. And the whole idea of #change the story is interesting because it's really about how your life story connects to the bigger story of people and planet over time. Like you said, there are more older people today than at any point in history, and children born today are likely to touch 7 generations in their lifetime, their own, their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents, and their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. So you can touch more time than ever before. It also references the Indigenous notion of looking at the impact of their decisions 7 generations into the future, and also looking to the past as well. So how can we connect all of these older adults, the increasing population of older adults, with young people to #change the story? And that's what our work is all about. And Ethan is going to be experimenting with different dialogue processes over the next year, and we'd love for you to be involved. And all you have to do is go to 7generationmarkham.org, and that'll be in the resource package, and email me that you'd like to be involved or get more information. So getting to Ethan's question that he's posing to all of us today, if you were talking to a person much younger or much older than you, what would you like to ask that maybe you're hesitant to ask? And I'm reminded of June Carter Cash. She was famous for, when people would ask her, "How are you?" She would say, "I'm just trying to make myself matter." So if I was talking to someone younger or older, I would want to be able to ask them, "How are you making yourself matter?" Because often people don't feel like they matter, but what are you doing, the little daily things, the big life moments that makes you matter? So that's my question, is how are you making yourself matter?
Excellent question. Who's going to challenge? Who's going to rise to that challenge? How about Helen? Helen Hirsch?
Yes, I'm here.
Yes.
Well, I was just, first of all, I was just writing congratulations to Peter and Dr. Tree, Dr. Peter, and also to Brian and Susan, because I'm working in a very similar area as you, but from a different perspective. And so I just put something in the, as you were saying that, in the comment to everyone, because I'm very convinced that now is the right time to start an age liberation movement, so to speak. Not that it has to be a movement per se, but and we're starting conversations about it with a whole range of people. And for instance, tomorrow I've got another one of our, we need to talk, we've had these intergenerational dialogues for the last couple of years that we've hosted online due to COVID, and found that they've been hugely beneficial. So there are ways in which we can help each other, but I really do think that, you know, Ethan, the work that you're doing, and Tom and Susan, there aren't many of us here in Canada who are launched on this process, so I think we really need to join forces. And Ethan, you know, I would welcome more conversations with you I was a high school principal and a headmistress at a girls' school here in Ottawa. So I am always talking to young people, and I'm very comfortable with it. And I just want you to know that it's the most significant things that have happened in my life have been inspired by young people. For instance, I started Top 60 Over 60 thanks to a former student of mine who introduced me to the Social Innovation Center, the Center of Social Innovation in Toronto, of which I knew nothing. Being in my late 60s at the time, social entrepreneurship didn't exist when I was your age, you know, nor did it exist really till much later. So there's so many things that I am grateful for that I want to, you know, promote with others, young people and older people, to make sure that the kinds of conversations that we have that are unscripted and that are randomized and that just foster that kind of understanding take place more regularly, you know? So I commend you, fellow Canadians, for the wonderful work that you're doing, and I look forward to talking to you offline. I don't want to take up time here. Too many important people to speak.
Thank you very much. Jan. Can you unmute yourself, Jan?
I thought that the exchange was absolutely thrilling, because I felt both of them were asking exactly the right questions. Right now, on the topic of how are we making ourselves matter, I see down there that there's a woman, Dana is here, from Prague in Czechoslovakia, and that she's under the name of Thomas Model, who lives in Boston, Massachusetts. So what's going on here? Dana, can you speak?
I will unmute myself. So hello. Actually, we had a couple of days ago, we had a long, maybe 90 minutes conversation about the topic that Thomas Model will deliver to International Federation on Aging, and it was about aging in place. And so at least Thomas told me about this meeting that I couldn't find a link from Moira to, so that's why I am under his name here. And what we were talking about was actually about that quite serious impact on the lifestyle of the elderly due to pandemic, and how people, because it was so long, too long, and people somehow mastered to change their lifestyle. They were praised for being at home, not to be actually active, because it was dangerous to get in touch with other people, and they somehow quite quickly adjusted to this lifestyle, and they first of all, they got older, they got lazier, and they somehow realized that they don't need actually to study anything, because they can live without it. And if you get 2 years to change your lifestyle, so, and if you are in age between maybe 70 and 80, so you are not so flexible to change it again back, you know, like to what you have done in the past. When you once found that it is somehow more comfortable, easier to be idle for you, not for, I mean, talking in general terms. So what not only me, what people who are organizing activities in this after COVID, almost after COVID period, are finding that it is extremely difficult to get people back. And in my situation, I have only half of the students whom I had before the pandemic. and they just don't feel that they should be active again, because it's enough for them to sit on their sofa and watch television and just
Thank
feel
you.
comfortable.
Thank you, Donna. You've raised a very interesting issue, because what you're saying is that COVID has created a huge obstacle that has basically discouraged the interaction that's so important for the intergenerational communication. And we can't count on simply using Zoom to do the job. So maybe, and I'll throw this in, I think that especially because I'm in the climate in the Northern Hemisphere, which is just finally becoming spring and maybe into even summer, I think that what we can do is to organize programs that get people outside into nature. And how do we do that? I saw this morning that they're talking about social prescriptions, that there are doctors and psychologists who are actually recommending a trip to the park or a different kind of walking club or outdoor playground for older adults. There are, what kinds of ways can we get people into nature so that we can find the environment in which both old people and young people are actually enjoying themselves and stimulated, therefore, to start answering these questions. So I think that that's my comment. Moira, back to you.
Thank you. I see Kathy Bailey has raised her hand. Kathy?
Yes, hi. Thank you so much, Ethan and Peter, of course. Ethan, I'm going to bring you back to the question Peter asked you. What do you want us to do? How can we help you? In your wildest dream, if you could ask me for anything right now to help you move forward with the world you dream of it being by the time you reach my age of 22. No, but by the time you're 70, what would you like me to do today for you?
I think it would just be participating with me. I think it would be participating with me in my future dialogues and helping to maybe guide me to bring together people of all generations to have conversations.
So if I get behind you and support you and lift you to do the things you dream of, that would be a good way for me to help you? That's what I'm hearing you say.
Yes, participating in future events and talking with youth and kind of talking about what really matters to all of us, to you as a person, to you individually, to others. Yeah.
If you were to give me a prescription of how many youth I should talk to in a week, what does that look like to you?
I don't think it has to be a set, structured number. I feel it's more impact-based.
Oh.
So I'm planning to hope to have some meetings with youth from around the world and together discuss things that truly matter, like the climate crisis, life. And so I feel it's not necessarily of hitting a quota of 6 kids talk to. I feel it's more about talking deeply with whoever you can, whoever would like to talk to you.
Does that include trees?
Absolutely.
Great. Thank
You know,
you.
Ethan, that was a good answer. I was going to give Kathy a time to talk to us, but I do think we should think offline about how many other people in this call and others part of the network might want to participate in another conversation to support your project specifically. So let's get a little concrete here. So careful, guys. If you volunteer, you'll be called on.
Well, let's ask them, Peter, to type in the chat if they would like to. So if all of you and any of you would like to participate with Ethan, just type your name in the chat.
Absolutely, and you'll record the chat, and we'll follow up with people.
Exactly. Emma has her hand up. Emma Bider, please.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, this is my first time participating in something like this, so I want to thank the Legacy Project for introducing me to it. I'm a communications coordinator with an organization called Climate Legacy, which is a new-ish NGO in Canada, trying to get seniors involved in climate action. And my question for the group kind of ties in really well to the conversation that was just had between Kathy and Ethan. Because Ethan's sort of request is that you, like Kathy, talk to people and engage them in these kinds of dialogues. And from my experience, this is something that people can be really scared of. So I wanted to ask everyone in the group, what is it that scares you about talking to others about this issue?
Moira, I noticed that Lyle Lukey would like to.
I was just wondering if anybody had an answer to Emma. What scares you about talking in this direction? Anybody? And then if not,
I can sort of speak to that. I think sometimes I definitely can avoid climate conversations with older people based on, because I'm in America, so sometimes it can be scary to start that conversation and sort of start an angry conversation or get in, yeah, I'm not that kind of confrontational, so I don't want to start a fight. And I see that in myself too. I find that I avoid conversations that with people that I know have a different opinion than me on politics and climate change, like my grandparents. And that is a fault for sure. Like I could definitely learn some things from them and they could definitely learn some things from me. But I have reflected on that a little bit as the scary thing is just, you know, having angry conversations and wanting to avoid that.
Kathy, just an aside, Peter said we should play, and with your virtual background, you keep disappearing. From my view.
I try to back out.
And then I see half your.
I know.
So
I think it's meant for one person, so it like picks up one of us, or I don't know.
I'm magically walking the woods as we speak, Moira.
Okay.
If
are there any more comments on what Emma asked?
If I may, I think one of the scary parts is that a lot gets reduced to politics and oppositional politics.
Yeah.
And I think the key thing here is to tap into our common humanity and to really try to see how can we change our social imaginary. And I think Dr. Peter talked about the imaginary. And I think that that's what Ethan is pointing at. How do we engage people to reimagine the world? And there's a lot of talk, about the Enlightenment revolution and postmodernism and metamodernism and all of these kinds of things. But really, when we get down to the root, to the core of things, what does it mean to be human? And I know that Brian and Susan are asking those questions. And so if we approach things less from the high levels and really get into the core of what do you really want from your life? What is a good life, right? And what do you love? Those are the questions that we really need to engage on, as opposed to coming down to say, has climate variations always existed? Let's get into the scientific facts. It's really about what do you love? What role do we play as part of nature? How are we connected to nature? And there's a quote by Einstein that talks about, how we're part of a whole. And so like we can start talking about those things as opposed to saying, you know, is the Green New Deal the way to go? And I think that's framing a conflict right away. We're coming to the solutions when in fact there is no solution, right? It's a reimagination. So I'm going to get off my soapbox, but thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Ruben. I think we have now Tom Mottle who wants to have a word. Tom? In the absence of Tom Lyle, you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you. Just back to the question of how we bring people together and a comment. When I heard Brian's comment about helping make people matter, because my hearing isn't very good, I thought he said originally, how do we make people matter? But in fact, I think both are quite important. To have those conversations, the fraught conversations, not the nice ones, about boomer issues, although I'm pre-boomer, about global warming and what have we done and what aren't we doing, right down to younger generations having difficulty buying property and stuff like that. So I think opening that up is fine. And Zoom, of course, is a very democratic platform to do that compared with a classroom. And I'm sure both Peter and Ethan would agree that that's the case. So just for what that's worth, make people matter and give them a dialogue.
Excellent, excellent. I wonder if Tom Mottle is there now. Tom? No. Well, I would like to ask Ethan a question. Ethan, if I were to say to you, what would be the top 3 concerns of your generation? What would you answer me?
I would say primarily the environment, then society, especially with the housing market, and the world is a crazy place. A lot goes on, and every day something else changes, and so we need to learn how to adapt. So there's a challenge with people not being able to find homes and kind of knowing what to do. And I feel another challenge is that of meaning in a society where we have almost everything at our fingertips and media, and there's nothing we really need. We're not working to survive in the wilderness. I feel it's hard to find meaning and purpose. So I feel those 3 things, environment, society, and then purpose, are 3 main challenges that I'd like to find I'd like to talk about.
Sure. They're pretty engulfing, those 3. Anybody has any suggestions for Ethan in that respect? Any help?
Those seem to be the concerns of many people, not just in his generation. So the quest for commonality, I think Ethan's just invited us to look. I mean, sense of purpose is really key. And it's particularly important for older folks who are facing the end of their life and what they want to accomplish. I agree with you, Ethan. You're speaking for your generation. I can't speak for my generation, but I think you've hit the proverbial nail on the head with those being real big concerns for the whole human race.
Indeed. Sylvia, I see that you have your hand up. So you need to unmute yourself.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much for this encounter. I really feel that something is, I don't know, transforming, evolving in us. And all those questions Ethan expressed are so deep, for deep conversations. Count on me. Yes. And something I wanted to add to this fire is that our entangled roots. We spoke of, I heard, to the core, and that's our heart. Heart and earth has the same letters in a different order, and those words come from the Latin and from the Sanskrit word through Latin, from the word hurdaya, which means precisely that, heart. Not only all what we know that heart stands for, it is also the nurturing power of the earth. So what we are doing here is that we are rekindling our connection to the heart. And so that's it. So I'm very grateful for having the opportunity to participate here. And also, being human is being earth, because the humans is earth that has very high nutritional power. So we are here, and I love very much this. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sylvia. And I see that Grace from Cape Town has her hand up. Grace?
Yes, indeed. First of all, congratulations to everybody on bringing this wonderful dialogue to our attention. It's been very stimulating. And Dana has played a very significant role in my life. And if it weren't for Dana, I wouldn't be here today. And I met Dana almost 15 years ago, I think. And she trained me in her teachings of brain jogging and whatever. And from that, I've evolved. And I was running courses on conscious aging before the COVID era. And I'm talking to you, Donna, in a sense, you stimulated my answer, because what has been interesting is that the course that I ran for the University of the Third Age on conscious aging, unfortunately, didn't break the COVID barrier, because most of those people weren't able to deal with the technology. But a very interesting thing happened in my life, which I managed to take advantage of, and I'm really excited about, and taking this opportunity to share it with everybody. I think I've mentioned on this forum before that in conjunction with TED, who ran a program called TED Circles, I gathered together a dozen people from the University of the Third Age to follow this program, where TED introduced us to an interesting topic, a controversial topic, and they gave us some videos to watch and gave us some suggestions. And I went into this and developed a group which has been going for 2 years now. We meet once a fortnight. All of a sudden, 2 months ago, TED decided to drop this program. I'm not quite sure why, but I'd formed a group and we enjoyed our interaction so much that we thought we've got to carry on. So I said, okay, we are going to become the edutainers, and we will continue to meet fortnightly. And instead of being stimulated by the TED circles for our ideas, we will take it in turns to run the groups ourselves. And we take up a topic and we'll give the group references to do a little bit of research, and then we'll use the Zoom facility to carry on our fortnightly conversations, one of which has become international, but I haven't got time to tell you about that. So I've excitedly adapted my facilitations to incorporate the changes necessitated by the COVID era. And I've created something which I think has got a great future. So I just wanted to share that with you.
Thank you very much indeed, Grace. I neglected to say to you at the top of the hour that if you had to leave, we would understand and that we would probably go on for another 15 minutes. I also just want to remind you, if you are happy to help Ethan, please just put your name in the chat and mention that. Who else would like to participate and talk? I don't have any hands up at the moment. Now, I was just wanting to ask you, Grace, does your group plan to do something in addition to its talking meeting? Are there actions planned?
My actions, I've actually just formed a second new group through the University of the Third Age. And I've transformed my offering from conscious aging to climate consciousness. So okay. I now run a monthly meeting on climate consciousness, which operates throughout South Africa. And I get guest speakers to come and do an interactive session. I say to them, I don't want you just to talk and it'd be questions at the end. I'd like you to introduce a program where we can use the facilities of the Zoom room, maybe do a breakout session, or maybe use the voting or the other facilities. And so that's another new endeavor where I'm hoping to capitalize on the Zoom room.
Thanks. Thanks very much. I'd like to just add then to what you're saying and to call on Cullen from Hawaii, Cullen Hayashida, because Cullen asks the question, how do we take care of each other and how do we motivate people to get them involved? And I think that is just the issue, because we're all talking more actively. Cullen, what are your thoughts on this matter based on your experience?
Well, I guess because we've lived longer than the young ones, I sense an initial sense of responsibility, and perhaps, you know, because we are also a very, very fast-growing population, you know, with skills and talents and experience and connections, and many of us have financial independence. We have a sense, we have an obligation to figure out some of what needs to be done. And so I guess one concern that I have is that while there's this human potential for change, and I sense that there's a need to work on pre-retirement workshops that are non-financial in nature to help people make that transition, to do this life review, this 50,000, you know, checkup, and to navigate and recalibrate their purpose. So that's one thing. That there's some other work that I think that's necessary in terms of just creating leadership. You know, how do we find groups like Pass It On to, in a sense, create many programs within our respective communities so that we can energize our generation. So that's one concern. For Ethan, I thought maybe one thought that I had was, you know, there's a lot of intergenerational programs that are beginning to emerge in various areas. In Hawaii, for example, I can think of 2 or 3 that are working on some minor projects, and there's you know, little projects that are attempted and some that may be kind of floundering a bit. I think it would be great if there were opportunities to begin networking with these, because this sharing, of course, will stimulate and even create new opportunities for change as well, positive social change as well. That's it.
Cullen. I see the clock is ticking, the time is ticking away, and we have very little time left over. Jan, would you like to say a few words before we wrap up?
I do want to just mention that the question to me is how to make sure that more people have the opportunity that Ethan has had working with the Legacy Project and his Global Leadership Project. It makes so much sense to open up the horizons for young people, both to express what their experience has been, but to be able to express it along with the seventh generation. It seems as if there are quite a few of us who are on this screen right now who have already volunteered to be part of, we're calling it helping Ethan, but actually it's helping ourselves, I'd say, to imagine how we can make use of Brian and Susan's Legacy Project, but also our own other plans in our areas to expand the kinds of opportunities that have been so well demonstrated here by Dr. Peter and Ethan. So let's get to it. And let's say here that, the Pasadena Network, I hope, will continue to be helpful in helping with the work that we're going to all sign up to do here. So we can show and tell what comes out from the signups that have occurred. Brian and Ethan, do you have any plan for how we might make use of that? What's the next step here?
I think with the time clicking on like now, Jan, we have to invite everybody to come to the next sessions. And when we meet in August for the wrap up, we'll have a long list of calls to action.
Very good.
What I would like everybody to do right now, you will find in the chat box that there is a feedback form, and this would be very useful to us if you could just fill it in, but really straight away, because otherwise we're all very busy. You'll go off and then you won't think about that, filling that in. So if you can take a few minutes straight after this to fill out that form, it's a feedback link and it's in the chat that you'll be able to find. I just want to tell you that this session has, as you know, been recorded, and it will shortly be on the Pass It On Network YouTube channel. And then I'd just like to mention that our next session on June the 13th with Rob Delight is going to be absolutely fascinating. He transformed Jan's way of thinking about her life, and he has the request to do the same for all the audience at this next session. And then after that, we're going to have Kathy Bailey and her daughter. And then as Dr. Peter said, in August, we're going to bring this all together and give ourselves marching orders, because that's what needs to happen. Talking about things is really excellent, and we need these conversations desperately. We also need to go ahead and to move to action. And I think I would like to end just by thanking all of you for your presence here today. It's so important to hear these messages and to spread these messages. And the special thanks, obviously, to Ethan and to Dr. Peter. You gave us a tremendous dialogue and so much food for thought. Thank you very much indeed. Jan?
And Reuben, his father, I just think
Sorry.
to have the privilege to father Ethan is also a grand accomplishment. And thank you so much, Brian, for the help that you have given us also. Wonderful.
Good. Thank you, everybody.